My name is Ashley. I was 27 when I found the company brochure that erased me. I didn't grow up dreaming of power or wealth. I dreamed of being seen. When my parents opened their print shop in a repurposed car lot outside Sacramento, I was 13 and already learning to laminate business cards and balance supply orders. Dad said we were a family operation, which meant they made the decisions and I did the work. And I did it all without asking for credit. I wasn't the daughter who needed praise. I was the one who fixed things. Broken printers, angry clients, last-minute orders. I kept everything moving. I never complained when payroll skipped me or when vacation meant folding flyers in the back room while everyone else went to Tahoe. It was fine. I told myself it was fine because I thought that kind of loyalty would mean something. When Dad had a minor stroke last spring, I didn't hesitate. I took over client meetings, managed vendors, renegotiated our lease when the landlord tried to double our rate. I kept the shop alive, and when Mom quietly handed me Dad's keys, I thought it meant something had changed. It hadn't. My brother Nate flew in a few weeks after the hospital stay. He'd spent the last 4 years in Portland, chasing startup dreams and posting about conscious leadership from yoga studios. Now he was back, wearing ironic glasses and talking about rebranding the shop. I wasn't worried. He was still Nate, still the kid who once mislabeled 3,000 wedding programs because he didn't read the client notes. I figured he'd stick around for a bit and drift out again. He didn't. The first time I noticed the shift was at a vendor meeting. Nate offered to sit in. Midway through, he cut me off and promised a turnaround time we couldn't meet. The client glanced at me, confused. I adjusted the timeline and smoothed things over. Afterward, Nate patted me on the back like I was an assistant. "Nice recovery," he said. I laughed it off until a week later when I walked into Dad's office after hours and saw a freshly printed company brochure on the desk. Thick paper, high gloss, a new tagline, family owned, proudly led by father and son. My name wasn't on it, not in the footer, not under the photo, not even in the acknowledgments. I stood there for 10 minutes, not moving, not breathing. The next morning, I asked Dad why. He laughed. "Marketing fluff," he said. "Don't get hung up on it." "Why is my name not in it?" I asked quietly. He didn't even look up. "You're lucky we let you help. That's not nothing." I nodded. I went back to my desk. I answered emails. I processed invoices. But something inside me had shifted. I began watching everything. Nate's pep talks, his sudden charm around staff, the way Dad repeated Nate's phrases as if he invented them, how vendors now called him for updates. Nate started showing up early, not to work, just to be seen. He brought coffee for the front desk and told stories loud enough to fill the entire floor. One day, he added emojis to the file system and deleted the backup folder I'd built over years. When I confronted him, he smiled. "Relax, Ash. It's more intuitive now." 2 invoices went unpaid that week. I stayed late to fix it, alone. But the worst part wasn't the chaos. It was how easily everyone applauded him. That Friday, Dad called me into his office. "You and Nate make a good team," he said. "But maybe it's time he starts handling more of the big stuff. You've done enough." He meant it as a kindness. I nodded, and something in me detached, not from the business, from the lie I'd built my identity on. The next Monday, Nate held a team huddle at the cafe across the street. I wasn't invited. I watched through the plate glass window as he gestured dramatically over his coffee cup, pointing at mock-ups I'd created the night before. The junior staff nodded. One laughed a little too loudly. From inside the shop, I could hear the paper cutter chewing through order forms, steady as always. The one machine that still obeyed me. When they returned, Nate slapped my desk on the way to Dad's office. "Client loved the direction," he said. I pitched a bold timeline. "Think you can make it happen?" I blinked. "Which client?" He waved vaguely. "The big one, Davis and Lee. The one I'd spent 6 months courting. The one with exact specs, non-negotiable deadlines, and a reputation for dropping vendors at the first sign of sloppiness." "What exactly did you promise?" "Delivery in 10 days, streamlined design." They wanted staggered rollout over 3 phases. "Yeah," he said, shrugging, "but that's old school." They were excited. He didn't see the look I gave him. He was already walking away. I called the client, smoothed it over, pretended we'd miscommunicated, realigned the timeline. By the time I was done, it was 8 p.m. and the streetlights outside flickered with the weight of another long day. I didn't go home. I walked 2 blocks to the parking structure where the landlord's office was, climbed to the rooftop level, and sat on the concrete ledge facing the city. I needed air and space. And a plan. The next morning, I pulled the backup binder from my drawer. I started documenting every change Nate made, every client he misquoted, every time a vendor contacted him and then came back to me confused. Not to sabotage, not yet, to witness. The hardest part was watching my parents pretend this was progress. Dad now called Nate a visionary. Mom started booking strategy lunches with the two of them at a nearby bistro, always during my busiest shifts. Once I walked past their table on my way to a supplier meeting. They waved. I didn't stop. The shop was changing. Slowly, but in all the wrong ways. Orders were delayed. Quality control was slipping. One longtime client dropped us without warning. But Nate smiled through it all. Transitions are messy, he said when I brought it up. You mean mistakes, I corrected. He leaned on my desk, grinning. You're great at details, Ash. I need you focused there. That night, I stayed even later. I reprinted misaligned labels, restocked low inventory, and rerouted a shipment Nate had redirected to the wrong address. It was nearly midnight when I finally turned off the lights. As I locked up, I saw something taped to the back door. A flyer, crisp, freshly printed, with our logo on top, a job listing. Hiring, general manager, seeking a dynamic, forward-thinking leader with creative vision, must be comfortable overseeing staff and vendor relations. Reports to owner. I stared at it. They were hiring my replacement. I wasn't leaving, but they were preparing like I already had. The next day, Nate walked in late with a smoothie and a grin. Oh, did you see the flyer? He asked. Dad wants to professionalize the team, bring in fresh energy. You mean someone to run what I've already built? He shrugged. You're good at operations. This is about scale. I said nothing. I sat at my desk, and inside, something sharp and careful settled in. I wasn't going to fight this out loud. Not yet. I was going to watch them hand over everything, and I was going to make sure they noticed when it was gone. The Tuesday meeting was supposed to be routine. Davis and Lee were coming in for a review, and I'd prepped the entire presentation. Clear visuals, sample proofs, revised delivery calendar. Everything polished. 10 minutes before they arrived, Nate swanned into the front lobby with 2 cappuccinos and a new shirt still creased from the tag. Did you update the deck? He asked. I blinked. It was finalized last night. Cool, I made a few tweaks. My stomach dropped. He plugged in his laptop, pulled up a slideshow I'd never seen before, and started scrolling through slides filled with abstract diagrams. Photos of smiling stock model workers and a rebranded mission statement. Reimagine print, redefine legacy. I scanned the pages. Not a single line from our original deliverables. Not a single acknowledgement of the system I'd built. When Davis and Lee arrived, Nate launched into his performance. What we're doing, he said, pacing slowly, is shifting from a transaction-based model to a trust-based brand. They nodded politely. I waited for my moment to steer the conversation back to actual operations. But that moment never came. Nate kept talking, spoke for both of us. And when the client asked about vendor timelines, he said, That's handled by our operations team. They'll follow my direction. Not Ashley, not me, them. After they left, I stayed behind in the meeting room, staring at the screensaver looping across the wall. Abstract shapes, bouncing in colors Nate had chosen without me. He walked in, still smiling. They ate it up, right? I stood. You undermined the actual proposal. He held up a hand. Whoa, relax, we're evolving, Ash. The old way was fine, but it's not scalable. You're detail-focused, that's great, but I'm the brand now. That word, brand, I went home that night, not to rest, but to print. Invoices, contracts, renewal agreements, especially the lease. Because 3 months earlier, when Dad was still in recovery and the landlord threatened to revoke our agreement, I had stepped in. Quietly, I renegotiated the lease terms myself, and I signed as guarantor, which meant I held the keys to the building, to the terms, to the fallback clause they hadn't bothered to read. They thought they owned the space, the name, the vision, but I held the paper that kept the roof over their heads. And I had kept it quiet until now. That Friday, I scheduled a maintenance walkthrough with the building manager. Nate thought I was checking vents. I was confirming square footage and assessing property condition for contingencies, something I hadn't done in months. Afterwards, I stopped by a nearby coffee shop and pulled out a notebook. I drew 2 columns: what they've taken, what they've missed. And then I started listing everything they didn't know they'd overlooked. The emergency supplier I'd built a silent contract with during a paper shortage, the backup design software I used at home, The client who still sent files to my personal number instead of the company portal. The name they dropped from the brochure, which still sat on the filing license. They didn't see me, but they'd built everything on my spine. And one quiet move at a time, I was about to remind them what happens when the spine disappears. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't confront Nate again. I waited. I watched, and I gathered what was mine. Wednesday afternoon, the parking lot shimmered with August heat as I hauled 3 reams of invoice stock from the back of my car. Nate was supposed to restock them last week, he'd promised, but the supply closet was still empty. When I pushed open the side door, I nearly dropped the box. Mom, Dad, and Nate were huddled around a table in the front reception. 3 place settings, salad bowls, napkins folded into triangles, bottled mineral water. It wasn't just lunch, it was a private strategy session. Didn't realize we were hosting a meeting, I said, breathing through my nose. Nate didn't even look up. Oh, just something casual. Dad wanted to talk branding. Mom smiled tightly. You looked busy, sweetheart. We figured we'd let you focus. My chest went hollow for a second. I set the box down. Branding? I asked. With who? Nate gestured toward the papers. Potential partner. Don't worry, we're keeping operations in-house. We'll just license out production to expand volume. Outsource our own systems, I said. That's efficient, Nate cut in. Scalable, modern. I looked at Dad. He didn't meet my eyes. I walked to the back, the box suddenly heavier in my arms. By the time I returned, they were laughing over something Nate had said. My seat was still empty. I sat on the floor of the back room and didn't move for 10 minutes. Later that night, I walked to the alley behind the building and stared at the loading dock. The concrete was cracked, the metal railing rusted, but the structure was mine, legally mine. I'd renewed the lease under my name, signed the insurance policy, even personally covered last winter's heating bill when cash flow dipped. They sat at their lunch table talking expansion while I covered utility gaps. They talked future, but I was the present. The next morning, I returned early. Earlier than Nate, earlier than Mom. I unlocked the back office, turned on the machines, and pulled out my backup laptop. Not the one assigned by the shop, the one I kept separate. I opened the vendor index, double-checked client delivery histories, and flagged every name Nate had streamlined in his folders. Then I made a second list. People who still texted me directly, who double-confirmed changes with me, who asked for Ashley from accounting because I was the only one who could read the notes in shorthand. They remembered me, even if the company didn't. At 9:45, Nate rolled in wearing sunglasses and talking on speakerphone. He flashed me a thumbs up. We're all good, he said loudly. I'll handle Ashley. He winked at me like we were co-conspirators. That afternoon, a courier arrived with a package for head of strategy. It was addressed to Nate. I signed for it. Inside, a prototype mock-up from a potential design partner, samples I'd sourced last year during a budget stretch. He was now presenting my frugal fix as a new discovery. He called it a lucky brainstorm. I said nothing, but I marked it down. That evening, I made a call, not to confront, not to retaliate, to inquire. I asked an old contact in commercial logistics what he knew about upcoming supplier rate hikes. He paused. Why? No reason, I said. Just curious what happens when the guy in charge forgets to check the renewal clause. He whistled. That's gonna bite someone. Maybe, I said. Then I hung up, because sometimes power isn't who talks loudest at the table. It's who holds the ledger nobody sees. It was supposed to be a normal Thursday. No alarms, no client crises, just an afternoon site inspection for a new bulk printer Nate insisted we demo live before investing. I arrived early, clipboard in hand, vendor appointment confirmed, numbers cross-checked. Nate was late, of course. Mom texted, running behind, just let the guy in. XO. But before the supplier arrived, someone else did. A man in a beige polo with a clipboard and a thin, unsmiling mouth. Ashley Bennett? He asked. Yes. He handed me a sealed envelope and a clipped acknowledgement form. Notification of lease status review. Per Section 14B, you are now the recorded point of contact for renewal conditions effective immediately. I froze. Wait, why is this being delivered here? He shrugged. Your name's on the contract, our office flagged upcoming expiry, standard pre-negotiation notice. I stared at the envelope. My signature was on the original file. I'd signed the updated terms in February, which meant they hadn't told me. Nobody had told me we were within 30 days of renewal. which meant they hadn't read the contract, which meant Nate's expansion plans were being pitched without the most basic foundation secured. When the supplier finally arrived, I was still holding the envelope. The demo went forward, barely. Nate arrived halfway through, smiling, loud, offering casual ideas about doubling output and pushing our scale. The supplier asked about zoning permissions. Nate waved a hand. "We've got it. My dad owns the place." The rep glanced at me. "Actually," I said quietly, "we lease, and the renewal has not yet been finalized." Nate blinked. "Wait, what?" I turned to him slowly. "I was just served a notice, today." For the first time in weeks, he looked unsure. "Dad said we were fine." I didn't answer, because now everything was shifting. That night, I sat on the floor of my apartment with the file spread across the rug. Every line, every clause, every expiration date I'd flagged 6 months earlier. I wasn't just the operations lead anymore. I was the legal safety net, and they hadn't even bothered to check. At 10:37 p.m., I received a group text from Mom. "Family dinner tomorrow at the Spalding Grill. Business chat after. Bring any notes you want to contribute. Dress nice. It's with guests." No context, no warning, just an expectation. I stared at the message. Then I typed back, "Sure," but inside, the ground had already split. They thought I'd keep carrying it all. Quietly, efficiently, invisibly. They thought that even if they erased me from brochures and budgets, I'd still show up with spreadsheets and a smile. They thought wrong, because this time, I wouldn't be coming just as the daughter. I'd be coming as the only one in the room who knew what kept the lights on. And when they tried to use my silence against me, I'd show them what silence really sounds like when it starts cracking. The Spalding Grill sat on the edge of the Riverwalk, glass walls, brushed steel fixtures. The kind of place you picked when you wanted to be seen closing a deal. I arrived 5 minutes early, not because I was eager, because I wanted to choose where I sat, but they'd already beaten me there. Mom waved me over with a manicured hand, her bracelets chiming like wind chimes. "We're just waiting on the Bradshaws. Sit here, sweetie, and seat, please, closer to the service aisle." I blinked. "Who are the Bradshaws?" "Potential partners," Nate said from across the table, not even looking up from his phone. "Dad set it up. They're interested in co-branding." Co-branding? Before I could ask, a waiter approached and handed me a prefixed menu. No choice, just salmon or risotto. Everyone else had full a la carte. I glanced at Mom. "Is this separate?" She smiled. "We assumed you'd want something light." I nodded once and folded the menu. 10 minutes later, the Bradshaws arrived. Polished, loud. They shook hands, threw around buzzwords like legacy scale and regional franchising. Then Mr. Bradshaw turned to Nate. "Now, walk us through your role in the company. You're the brain behind the rebuild, right?" Nate beamed. "Well, I wouldn't say brain, more like vision." Dad laughed. "He's being modest. Nate's completely transformed our model." "Really?" Mr. Bradshaw leaned in. "And what about logistics?" I imagine growing this fast required some serious systems work. "Oh, that's all him too," Mom chimed. "He's a natural." I didn't speak, not because I couldn't, because I was too busy watching. Watching as my name, my systems, my structure, my sweat were erased in real time. I sat through appetizers. I sat through Dad toasting new blood and bold futures. I sat while Nate described workflows I'd built from scratch as if he'd dreamt them up in a brainstorm over iced matcha. And then it happened. Mrs. Bradshaw turned to me. "And you are?" Before I could answer, Nate leaned in with a laugh. "Oh, Ashley, she's the heart. Been around forever." Heart, not lead, not director, not strategist. Heart, a prop. I nodded slowly. Yes, forever. Mrs. Bradshaw smiled politely and turned away. By the time dessert arrived, I felt invisible and exposed at once, like being framed inside glass. But I didn't leave. I waited until the check was paid, the handshakes exchanged, the room cleared. Then I stood. "Dad," I said softly. He turned surprised. "Yeah? Did you read the lease?" He blinked. "What?" "The lease," I repeated. "The one that keeps the shop open." He looked at Nate, then back at me. "Well, I thought we had time." I nodded. "You don't." And I walked out. The air outside was cool and sharp. My heels clicked against the stone walk like a countdown. They had made their choice. Now it was my turn. The next morning, I arrived before sunrise. Not out of habit, out of necessity. I unlocked the front door of the shop like I had 1,000 times before. The smell of toner and morning dust hit me in a way it never had. This time, I wasn't walking in as a daughter, I was entering as a problem they hadn't accounted for. The building felt quieter than usual. I crossed the lobby and made my way to the file cabinet in the back hallway. Top drawer, second folder from the left. That's where the original lease extension was filed, the one I signed. The one with my initials on the expansion clause they never noticed. Clause 22C, in the event of a material restructure or external partnership proposal, the lease must be renegotiated under updated valuation within 14 days with consent of all signatories. I was the sole signatory. I scanned it again, then made a copy. Two, actually. At 10:03 a.m., Nate waltzed in humming to himself, holding 2 iced lattes. One landed on my desk. "Vanilla oat," he said. "Felt like a treat-yourself day." I slid the paper across the table without speaking. He blinked. "What's this?" Clause 22C. His face twisted slightly. "Okay." "I'm invoking it." His laugh was quick, nervous. "Come on, Ash, you're not actually going to pull legal language on your own family." I met his eyes. "You're not just my family anymore, Nate. You're someone attempting to restructure a company without reading the foundation it sits on." He stared at the line I'd highlighted. "You're serious?" "I was always serious. You just never noticed." He leaned back. "Dad will fix this." "Dad doesn't have the authority," I said. "Not without me." He stood there for a moment, quiet for once. Then he left the room. By noon, Mom called. I didn't answer. Instead, I drove to the small business office downtown. I filed a renewal delay petition under California Property Code, citing clause invocation and requested arbitration. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't explosive, it was worse. It was official. That afternoon, Dad showed up at the shop unannounced. No call, no warning, just the slow shuffle of shoes on tile as he entered the production floor. He found me at the counter, checking a shipment. "I don't understand," he said. I looked up. "Understand what?" "This, you. Why would you pull something like this now? We're in the middle of a partnership deal." "No," I said. "You and Nate are in the middle of pretending I don't exist. I'm just reminding you that I do." He shook his head like I was being difficult. "It's just paperwork, Ashley." "No," I said. "It's mine." He opened his mouth, closed it, then turned and walked out. And that's when I knew it had landed. They weren't just surprised, they were cornered, because the one person they forgot to count was the only one holding the gate. By Monday, the shop had a new rhythm, silent tension under fluorescent light. Nate stopped holding meetings. Dad stopped showing up entirely. Mom texted passive-aggressive questions about calming things down. No one mentioned the lease, but I could feel it pressing on every hallway and calendar square they tried to ignore. The silence should have been satisfying, but it wasn't, because I hadn't built all this to destroy it. I'd built it to last. Which is why, when my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number, I answered without hesitation. "Is this Ashley Bennett?" the voice asked. "Yes." "This is Jordan Mitchell. I used to manage Eastway Logistics. We handled your overnight runs back in 21. You probably don't remember." "I do," I said immediately. "Your team pulled us out of a 3-day blackout during the ink shortage." He laughed. "Didn't think you'd remember." "Why are you calling?" "Well," he said, "we've been watching what's going on. Some of your vendors reached out. There's talk about leadership changes, restructuring. One of my guys flagged your name was missing from the new contracts." I didn't respond. "Thing is," he continued, "when we signed our original deal, it was because of you. Not your dad, not the kid with the lattes. You." I closed my eyes. He kept talking. "So if you're in play, if there's a shift happening, we'd be interested in renegotiating. Directly." "You're offering a side deal?" "No," he said calmly. "We're offering a lifeline, but only if you hold the reins." I let the silence hang between us like a choice. Then, "I'll be in touch." I hung up and stared at my desk for a long time. It wasn't just that someone remembered, it was that someone had waited. I went to the back and unlocked the drawer I never let anyone touch. Inside were the legacy agreements, vendor files, dormant contract drafts, dormant equity offers, all things I'd once planned to build into a second location, back when I still thought we meant all of us. And just like that, the question shifted. Not how do I keep this alive, but what do I do with it now that it's mine? That evening, I went to the warehouse floor and turned on every overhead light. The hum was deafening, sterile, electric. I stood in the middle of the supply racks and whispered to no one. You counted me out too early. And for the first time, I believed it. The next week, I got a lunch request. Not from Mom, not from Dad, not even from Nate. From Jeremy Tran, our third-party auditor. He handled compliance reviews once a year, mostly behind the scenes, always polite and forgettable. The message was simple. Let's meet, not at the office. I chose a diner 2 blocks from the print shop, vinyl booths, strong coffee. No one from our side ever came here. Jeremy was already seated, laptop closed, fingers tapping the table. I slid into the seat across from him. This isn't your usual style. I usually don't get involved, he said, but this time, I couldn't stay out of it. He reached into his bag and pulled out a manila folder. What's this? I asked. Your brother's been circulating numbers, forecasts, timelines, all tied to your shop's name, but without your name on them. I opened the folder. Spreadsheets, digital scans, distribution schedules with my systems duplicated, rebranded, and scrubbed of attribution. Jeremy tapped a page. This one, it uses your original inventory module, verbatim. He submitted it to a vendor summit last week. I recognized the code. I stared at it, my breath caught somewhere between rage and resignation. Jeremy leaned in. Here's what you need to understand, he said. He's not just minimizing your role, he's converting your legacy into leverage. They think they've locked you out. They? Your parents signed off on the deck. It's a pitch to investors. Nate's name is on every page. I shut the folder, and Jeremy wasn't finished. There's more. I spoke with a client contact at Purewell Distributors. They were told you'd step down. My voice cracked. What? They were surprised. Thought it didn't sound like you. I exhaled slowly. You're not as hidden as they think, Jeremy said. People noticed when you disappeared. I looked at him. Why are you helping me? He smiled, tired, sad, because I've seen people like you erased too many times. And you're the first one I've seen who kept the receipts. I took the folder, stood. Thanks, I said. I know what to do now. Back at the shop, I moved differently. Quieter, more deliberate. I copied the files to a secure drive. I updated my vendor contact list, and I drafted 3 letters. 1 to my landlord, 1 to my legal contact, and 1 to myself. It wasn't a resignation, it was a declaration. Because if they were rewriting the company without me, they'd have to learn what it feels like when the foundation walks. They were in the middle of a creative planning session when I walked in. The glass meeting room wasn't soundproof. Nate's voice leaked out like steam from a pressure valve. Buzzwords. Q4 acceleration. Operational agility. The usual. I knocked once, hard, 4 heads turned. Nate, Mom, a junior assistant, and someone I didn't recognize. Probably another advisor trying to ride the new Bennett brand. Ash? Nate said, fake cheerful. Kind of in the middle. I dropped the envelope on the table. This is your new usage agreement. He blinked. What? I pointed at the envelope. If you want to keep using the workflows I designed, the vendor contracts I built, and the system files tied to my legal name, which is on the lease, I added, turning to Mom, and still registered as operational lead, then you'll need to license it. Mom's face tightened. You're being ridiculous. Am I? I said quietly. Because I've already filed notice. Effective next month, you'll owe me back payment for continued usage, or I'll file injunction to block systems under my original designs. Nate looked stunned. You're going to sue us? I smiled. No, I'm giving you a choice. He stood, puffed up like he could intimidate his way out of it. You can't actually enforce this. I opened my bag and slid over a second folder. It's already drafted. Inside, licensing terms, vendor release clauses, evaluation summary from Jeremy's compliance team. Every data point they erased now had a monetary value. You trademarked your process? Mom whispered, shocked. No, I said. I protected what I built. You just assumed I wouldn't. The assistant in the corner pretended to scroll her phone, but I saw her eyes dart up. Saw the way her breath hitched when she realized the tide had turned. Dad entered late, saw the room, paused. Ashley, what's this about? It's about authorship, I said without turning. It's about name, mine. Mom sighed. Can't we just talk about this like family? Family doesn't lie about who built the foundation. Family doesn't erase someone and then profit off their absence. Nate spoke again. We didn't erase you. No, I said. You absorbed me. Silently, strategically. Now you're learning what happens when the person you absorbed steps out of your shadow. I waited, let it sink in, then turned to the stranger at the table. You're reviewing this for partnership? He nodded slowly. Yes, I extended my hand. Ashley Bennett, original architect, process designer, facility co-signer, I'll be updating you directly from now on. He shook my hand, everyone else stayed frozen. It was done. But this wasn't revenge. This was memory, finally corrected. Within 72 hours of delivering the licensing agreement, the tremors began. First came the client calls. 3 major accounts, ones Nate had recently pitched new vision packages to, contacted me directly. Not the office. Not the admin line. Me. They'd seen the filings, the clause activation, the licensing structure. One of them, a longtime contact named Felicia, didn't mince words. I saw the proposal without your name and flagged it immediately. Either you're involved or we're pulling out. I didn't gloat. I formalized it, sent her a direct services memo listed under my personal consulting banner. By Thursday, the courier company dropped off a notification to the shop. Lease terms under review. Nate texted me something snide. You trying to burn it all down? But I didn't respond because I wasn't burning. I was clarifying, and it worked. The junior assistant who'd avoided eye contact during the meeting asked if we could talk. We met outside a tea bar half a mile from the shop. I didn't know, she said, eyes wide. I thought you were part of it until you weren't. I was always part of it, I said softly. You just weren't allowed to see that. She nodded. Everyone's nervous. Your brother's been pacing the office. Your mom tried to delete your name from the shared drive. But the vendors keep asking for you. She paused. What happens next? I didn't have to think. I'm not chasing a title, I'm redrawing the map. By Friday, 2 more vendors reached out with audit concerns. The bank put a hold on an invoice batch due to conflicting authority signatures. And the building's landlord, an older man named Craig, who once called me the only Bennett who pays on time, left a voicemail. Just confirming, renewal still pending. Let me know if it's you we'll be dealing with directly. No offense, but I prefer it. The next morning, Nate barged into the shop alone. No entourage, no coffee, just a white face and a cracked voice. This isn't sustainable, he said. You're right, I replied, not looking up. It's not. You're splitting everything in half. No, I corrected. I'm splitting what was never shared in the first place. He rubbed his temples. What do you want? I turned to face him. Recognition, retroactive licensing, and my name back on every page it was stripped from. That's it? That's the start. He laughed, bitter, cornered. You're not going to stop, are you? No, I said, because you didn't stop when I was quiet. And now I wasn't. Not anymore. Sunday afternoon, the shop was closed, but I was there. Not working. Waiting. They thought we were still negotiating, but I was past that. This wasn't a deal anymore. It was a reckoning. Mom was the first to arrive. She wore pearls in silence. Then Nate, late, jittery, sunglasses on indoors like that, made him harder to read. Dad came last, slow and reluctant, like he already knew. I had the table ready. 3 chairs, 1 folder, nothing more. Is this really necessary? Mom asked as she sat. I placed a copy of the new terms in front of each of them. No more licensing, I said. This time it's full transfer. Nate scoffed. Of what? Of your public claim to the systems, the workflows, and the brand timeline. In writing, you'll acknowledge that the operational architecture, vendor channels, and legacy partnerships were designed, implemented, and led by me. Alone. Dad winced. I continued. You will also submit an updated business narrative to the partnership board. With my name. Mom shook her head, barely containing herself. Ashley, this isn't how families fix things. I'm not fixing anything, I said. I'm finishing it. Nate stood. You can't just rewrite history. No, I said. I'm restoring it. He laughed bitterly. You don't think this makes you look desperate? Desperate? I tilted my head. You handed out my work under your name. I stayed silent. You deleted me from our systems. I rebuilt them in private. And even now I've offered terms instead of filing damages. That's not desperation. That's mercy. The room pulsed with that word, mercy. And for the first time in this entire war, Dad spoke. Not to Nate, to me. I remember the day you reopened the shop after I got sick. You stayed here overnight. I did, I said, flat, I saw the lights at 3 in the morning. I told your mother. I knew you'd keep it together. Mom flinched. You let them take the credit anyway, I said. He didn't deny it. I was tired, he murmured. So was I replied. Still showed up. Silence. Nate sat down again slowly. What happens if we don't sign? I opened the second envelope. If you decline, I'll forward this to our top vendors, attach the documented workflow files, and inform the business press that the company has entered internal legal dispute over origin claims. Mom went pale. And the lease? Dad asked, voice quiet. I'll terminate it under breach of collaborative conditions. The clause holds. That was the final crack. He nodded slowly. I'll sign. Mom didn't look at him. Nate leaned forward. We built so much. No, I said, you scaled what you didn't understand. I built. And I was taking it back. They signed, all three. The documents sat on the table like surrendered weapons. I didn't gloat, because this was never about watching them lose. It was about ending the erasure. Nate slid the last page back toward me. There, you got what you wanted? I folded the document, slid it into my folder, and stood. Almost. Mom looked up sharply. What do you mean, almost? I have one final term, I said calmly. Dad's hand froze halfway to his water glass. Nate narrowed his eyes. We agreed to everything. What else could you possibly want? I paused, let the air still. Then, the name stays with me. Nate blinked. What name? The Bennett Company, I said. Mom's voice was sharp. That's your father's name. That's our family name. No, I said evenly. It's the company I kept alive. It's the name clients associate with my systems, my voice, my execution. You can keep your relationships, your bank accounts, your structure. But the company identity belongs to me now. You're trying to strip us of our legacy, she snapped. You already did that when you removed mine, I said. Dad exhaled, slow. What would we even operate under? That's not my concern, I said. You wanted to scale, rebrand. Call it anything you want, just not what I built. Mom looked like she might say something venomous, but Nate interrupted. Let her have it, he said softly. She turned. What? He didn't raise his voice. She earned it, and you know it? Once, it settled like dust no one wanted to breathe. I collected the folder and headed for the door. Ashley, Dad called. I stopped. He stood, hands loose by his sides. Whatever you call it next, make it last. I turned halfway. I will. Then I left. Outside, the light was sharp and high, clean. I walked to my car without looking back. By the end of that week, I filed the name transfer. Not just with the lease, not just with the partners, but with the registry itself. Ashley Bennett, principal, legacy rights holder, operational founder. I didn't have to explain it anymore. The paperwork would, and when I updated the signage the next month, clean new lettering, minimal serif, I didn't send them a photo. They could drive by and see it themselves. It said one thing only, Bennett, astern by Ashley. The night after the new sign went up, I returned to the shop alone. No partners, no press, just me and the building I'd once saved in silence. The front windows caught the streetlight, clean glass, bright lettering, no trace of the people who had tried to write me out. Inside, everything was quiet, too quiet. The hum of printers, the beeping of door sensors, the faint chatter in the back room, I knew those sounds by heart. But tonight, none of them played. It was just me and the echoes. I made my way to the warehouse floor past rows of shelves I'd once labeled by hand. The old markers still bled faint red along the corners. I could trace the journey with my eyes closed, and for the first time in months, I let myself feel it. Not the anger, not the legal tension, the grief. Of what was stolen, of what never should have had to be reclaimed. Of the nights I stayed past midnight fixing systems no one ever thanked me for. The weekends I missed weddings, birthdays, hours of sleep just to keep things together. All so they could pretend I was just the heart. I sat on the pallet beside the rear loading door and pressed my palms to the concrete. It wasn't just a company. It had been my sanctuary, my burden, my inheritance and sweat. They hadn't just tried to erase me, they tried to live inside my shadow. And now that shadow had a name again, mine. But the truth, even that didn't fix everything. Because knowing you've won doesn't mean the war leaves you untouched. The scar of being unseen runs deeper than any courtroom document can seal. So I made one last choice. The next morning, I met with a contractor I trusted. walked him through the back hallway, pointed to the side annex, old storage space with potential. I want this gutted, I told him, and turned into something else. He asked, what kind of something? I smiled. Quiet. He nodded, didn't press, and that night I left a letter on the table in the front office. For myself. It said, you built this, you defended it, now let it stand. You don't owe them the aftermath. And I locked the door behind me, not out of fear, but because some legacies don't need witnesses to be real. 6 months later, I stood inside a different building. No industrial shelving, no ink-stained tile. This one smelled like cedar and warm paper. The walls were matte cream, the kind that caught morning light and turned it gold. It wasn't a print shop, it was a space for building things nobody could take. Workshops, quiet consultation, women-led startups, story keepers, idea starters who'd all been told maybe next year. I called it First Brick because that's what they tried to take from me, the first brick I ever laid. And now I was handing out bricks of my own. The opening day wasn't flashy. Just coffee, soft jazz, and a steady stream of voices coming through the door. New voices. No Nate, no mom, no dad, though someone did show up. A woman in her late 40s. Nervous smile, said her name was Jill. I followed your story, she said, clutching a notepad. I was in logistics for years. Stepped down after some, let's call them, erasures. I nodded. She looked around, eyes wide. You built all this? I did, I said. You kept your name on it? I smiled. This time, yes. She didn't stay long, just long enough to sit in one of the front chairs, take a breath, and say softly, thank you for not disappearing. And that's when I realized that was the real revenge. Not the signatures, not the silence I broke, but the fact that I stayed, fully visible, fully mine. That evening, as the last guest left, I locked the door behind her and walked to the back wall where one plaque hung, small, wooden, barely bigger than a hand. It read, this space was built on what they thought you'd forget, and beneath that, in small serif text, you didn't. I turned off the main lights, but left one on, by the window. So if anyone from my past ever walked by, they'd know I didn't need them to see me anymore. But I let them look anyway, because sometimes healing isn't hiding. It's standing exactly where they left you and being more.